And he became so irritated by these questions that he really fell into quite a bad mood and began to declare to the class that my ideas were silly, as he put it, and this was the souring of our relationship.
Your contract was not renewed?
No, no.
Despite the fact that you had the most popular elective class at Harvard,
yeah,
and had won the teaching prize.
But as a consolation, I got to move to Sweden, which has its plus sides.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Professor Brian Palmer.
Thank you.
Teachers at University of, how do you pronounce it?
Uppsala.
Uppsala, here in Sweden. He's a professor of social anthropology. As we move on now to the peace protests that are taking place, yes, right here in Sweden. And Professor Palmer will be leaving us and will be joined by two peace protesters as we continue this broadcast from Stockholm, Sweden. Institutions like the Nobel Prize have helped link Sweden's international reputation to peace and reconciliation. But few people know Sweden is also one of the world's top exporters of weapons. Sweden is among the world's top arms exporters in per capita terms. Its clients include the United States and Britain, with shipments more than doubling since 2000. Annika Spalde is an activist with Avrusta, which is called Disarm in Swedish. It aims to stop Swedish arms exports to countries violating human rights. The group is part of the Swedish Christian peace network, OFHAG. Annika joins me here in Stockholm. And we are also joined by another activist who will talk about her work as well. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Cattis Laska, and I'm also part of the anti-militaristic peace movement UFOG.
And UFOG means?
It's an old word for mischief in Swedish, and it's also meaning disobedience to power structures and, yeah, not obeying laws that we think are unjust.
I'd like to talk to both of you about your protest in October. Annika, why don't you begin? What did you do?
Well, since we feel that the peace movement has been working for so many years to stop these arms sales, which also violate our own guidelines, for example, that we sell weapons to countries at war and to countries who seriously violate human rights. And still these sales just grow bigger and bigger. So we feel that we as ordinary citizens has a responsibility to act then and to physically try to stop these weapons from being shipped off. And then, so apart from more traditional political methods, we also then use disarmament actions, which means that we, with an ordinary hammer, starts the disarmament by disabling parts of weapons so that they can't be used to kill or hurt anybody. So in October we went into two different factories in Sweden, both part of the old Bofors company, which is now one of them owned by BAE Systems.
BA meaning British Aerospace.
Yes, Europe's biggest weapons company.
And Bofors is where Alfred Nobel actually established the weapons industry.
It was, yes, in Karlskoga.
Bofors, for our audience around the world, is spelled B-O-F-O-R-S, if you're looking for it on a map. Mm-hmm. Yes, Anne?
And the other group went into Saab Bofors Dynamics, which is another company owned by, Swedish-owned.
Well, Saab is interesting because we think of Saab, well, General Motors owns Saab in the United States, the automaker, and Ford owns Volvo, another Swedish company. Both they are trying to sell.
Yes.
But Saab here is not the automaker, because it was bought by General Motors, but just the weapons manufacturer.
Yes, Saab now is Sweden's biggest weapons manufacturer, and not all Swedes know that either. They do, among other things, the fighter jet, the Gripen, and also grenade launchers that we sell now to US used in Iraq.
What are these grenade
like
launchers
the Carl
called?
Gustav and the AT-4, and also a GPS-guided, newly developed grenade called Excalibur.
And these are used in Iraq?
Yes.
Are there soldiers in Iraq from Sweden?
No, Sweden is not part of the the war in Iraq, and most Swedes were strongly against the invasion of Iraq.
But soldiers are part of the war in Afghanistan.
Yes, in Afghanistan they are.
So specifically, I'd like you to talk about your actions. Cattis Laska, talk about what happened in October. What did you do?
Well, we were an action group, a part of UFOG, and we went into 2 weapon factories at the same night. 2 persons went into Saab Bofors Dynamics in Eskilstuna, where they make, for example, the 84 and the Carl Gustaf grenade launchers, and they disarmed about 20 Carl Gustaf grenade launchers.
And when you say disarmed 20 Carl Gustaf grenade launchers, what do you mean disarmed?
They disabled them to prevent them to being used in wars, so they can't be used now.
And what do you mean disabled? How did they do this?
They did it by using a hammer, making scraps inside the grenade launchers.
They scraped inside the grenade launcher.
Yeah. And so it's very important that well, there's very much details in those launchers, so they have to be perfect. So it's enough just to scrape a bit to disable them. And then me and another person went into the BAE Systems Bofors factory in Karlskoga.
British aerospace.
Yes, and where we disabled some parts for howitzers going to India.
How did you disable them?
We also used hammers to scrape and to hammer them.
Have you gone to trial for this?
Yes, the 2 of us going into British Aerospace Bofors had a trial in the beginning of November, but now it's on appeal for another trial.
And were you sentenced for that action?
Yeah, we were sentenced to 3 months in prison. And
will you be going to prison soon?
Well, first we will have the other trial, and then probably we will be sentenced to prison again.
Annika, your role in all of this?
Yes, we decided that I'd be outside at this night and having phone contact with both the groups, and also receiving material that they filmed in Eskilstuna, which you can actually see on YouTube, for example, where they are disabling these grenade launchers. And put that on our website. And then I met some journalists the day after, and then later tried to go in myself, or I went in myself at BAE Systems, also to try and continue the disarmament, but I was then arrested before I had disarmed anything.
Did you tell the authorities yourself what you had done? This seems to be a tradition of Plowshares activists and other countries, from the United States to Britain, is telling them, calling them up and saying, you've done this. Yes,
I mean, we feel very strongly about nonviolence and openness, and we always tell exactly what we have done and take responsibility for that. And those in Eskilstuna had the time actually to call the police when they felt they were ready with the disarmament work. And Cattis and Pelle were discovered before they had that opportunity. But that's important for us to take responsibility, and also in the following trials to be able to argue our case, and with the goal of sometime having these laws changed that permit this exportation going on.
What is the response of the Swedish population? I think many people must be surprised listening to or watching you both today. I mean, we are going to see the celebration of the Nobel Peace Prize in honor of Alfred Nobel here in Sweden. And here you are, peace activists, taking on what may surprise people to be the 2nd largest weapons exporter per capita in the world, Sweden.
Yeah, I think many people just doesn't know about it. Well, Swedish citizens doesn't know about Sweden being one of the top 10 largest arms producers in the world. But then, there's also these laws that, that permits the weapons export and stop people from protesting against it, because then they will get fines and be put into prison.
We have received a lot of support. We have this webpage where you can also sign an appeal where it says that I support this kind of nonviolent disarmament actions, and I see them as necessary in this situation. And we have at least a couple of hundred people and several organizations who have signed that. And so I think it's a lot of people feel it's quite radical action needs to be taken. Also, since with this government, and because there will be next year probably a proposal for new regulations, guidelines for the weapons export, which then risk to be much more liberal than those that we have today. So it's important to act, we feel, also at this moment.